So, today we're going to try and deconstruct one of the great puzzles in all of psychology, narcissistic personality disorder. But we're not just going to run through a checklist of traits. No, we're going to explore a really fascinating new framework that kind of reveals the machine humming underneath it all. Let's get into it. I mean, this is the central mystery, right? How can somebody seem so incredibly grandiose, just so untouchable, and then completely shatter at the tiniest, slightest criticism? That contradiction, that's the key. And by the end of this, you'll understand the engine that's powering both sides of that very strange coin. You know, for the longest time, we've had pretty good descriptions of NPD. You know, the grandiosity, the lack of empathy, that sense of entitlement. But honestly, that's like listing the symptoms of a fever without ever knowing about the virus causing it. This Ouroboros theory, though, it offers a structural diagnosis. It looks at the psyche as a whole system, like a self-feeding snake, and it pinpoints exactly where the feedback loops have gone completely haywire.
Okay, so before we can really dig into what's broken, we first need a blueprint of what a healthy system is supposed to look like. And this model gives us a really powerful one, the healthy Ouroboros.
So a healthy psyche, it's an open system. I want you to imagine a snake eating its own tail. Now, that sounds kind of self-destructive, right? But it's not. It's doing it to constantly rebuild itself. It takes in new information, the good, the bad, the totally unknown, and it actually metabolizes it into growth. The theory has this great name for it, the radiant chomp. It's dynamic, it's flexible. The narcissistic system, as we're about to see, is the dead opposite of this.
All right, now let's look at how this beautiful, elegant system just breaks. With NPD, the psyche goes into this state of total lockdown.
And here's the absolute core of the problem. The narcissistic psyche tries to do something that's literally impossible. It tries to create a perfectly closed system, like a psychic firewall, all to protect this grandiose but incredibly fragile false self from any piece of information that contradicts its perfection. It wants to be a diamond, perfect, flawless, and totally unchanging.
And this is where the theory gets really interesting, because it applies a concept from, of all places, physics to the human mind. See, in the real world, a closed system always breaks down. It's the second law of thermodynamics. By blocking out all criticism, the system also starves itself of all the new energy it needs to survive. Things like love, connection, actual learning. This builds up this immense internal pressure. The theory calls it psychic entropy, which is really just unprocessed shame and rage. And eventually, it just burns out.
This complete system lockdown creates a profoundly warped view of reality. And the first major consequence is a worldview called solipsistic monism.
So what on earth does that mean? Well, deep down, the person with narcissism operates as if they're the only truly real person in the universe. Everyone else isn't a separate human being with their own inner world. No, they're just functional objects, like a phone or a car, existing only to serve a purpose for them. And this isn't just simple arrogance. It's a deep, structural defense against the absolute terror of needing anybody, because needing someone would make them feel terrifyingly small and vulnerable. This worldview then completely corrupts the very logic of cause and effect, and that leads to another huge distortion. This idea explains why there's so often this massive gap between their huge ambitions and what they actually achieve. They truly believe that intending to be a great artist is the exact same thing as being one. The whole step of doing the work gets skipped because, having to work suggests you weren't perfect to begin with. This is also why, when reality doesn't line up with their intent, they absolutely cannot take responsibility. They just rewrite history to keep their perfection intact.
Okay, so that's the system-level failure. That's the big picture. Now let's zoom in and break down how this poison corrupts the four core components of the self.
This table just lays it out so beautifully. First, you have the core self, the autonomous part. Instead of being unified and flexible, it becomes this fixed monad, a rigid, unchanging diamond. Then you've got the relational part. Instead of connecting with people, it becomes purely about use. People are objects. The systemic part, the one that understands rules in society, well, it sees itself as the grand exception, total entitlement. And finally, the adaptive part, which is supposed to help us learn and grow, it becomes rigid. It tries to bend reality using denial and gaslighting instead of adapting to it.
And here's the thing. When you put these four broken components together, they don't just stay inside. They generate this tragically predictable and destructive pattern out in the real world, especially in their relationships.
This is that infamous cycle. Idealize, devalue, and discard. At first, they mirror you so perfectly it feels like you've met your soulmate. But, and this is the crucial part, the moment you assert your own separate needs, the moment you show you're your own person, you become a threat to their closed system. So, to restore their perfect little self-contained world, they have to devalue you, attack you, and ultimately eject you. It's the inevitable, tragic output of this broken internal machine.
So you might be thinking, wow, this sounds completely hopeless. But is it? If the fundamental problem is a closed loop, then the solution, logically, has to be finding some way to crack it open again.
And this is so important. This approach isn't about shaming or trying to destroy the person. It's about structural repair. It's like teaching a digestive system that's completely shut down how to metabolize food again. The whole goal is to restart that radiant chunk of reality. So how does that actually work? Well, it happens in a few key steps. First, you have to help them see the pattern, this closed loop they're trapped in. Then, the therapist provides this incredibly strong, safe container that can actually withstand their rage without retaliating. And that slowly teaches the system that, hey, negative feedback isn't actually fatal. And finally, you bring in this powerhouse technique called empathic confrontation.
This is just a perfect example. It's so effective because it does two critical things at once. First, it validates the internal feeling, the why behind their rage. I know you felt attacked. See? That immediately lowers the defenses. Then, it confronts the external behavior, the what they actually did. However, you terrified her. It masterfully separates their legitimate need from their destructive strategy, and it opens up a tiny space to find a new solution.
And the ultimate goal of this whole process is integration. It's about helping that big, grandiose, godlike false self finally connect with the terrified, hidden, vulnerable child it was built to protect in the first place. It's about teaching the entire system that true strength and real connection don't come from being a perfect, closed-off diamond, but from having the courage to be an open, learning, growing system.
In the end, this whole complex disorder can almost be boiled down to a single tragic declaration. It's this desperate scream into the void, just trying to convince itself of its own totality. But the underlying reality of the system, that quiet whisper of the Ouroboros, reveals the profound cost of that belief. If you are everything, then you are utterly, completely alone.
And this really leaves us with a final thought. And it's not just about narcissism, but about all of us. This model shows us the deep pathology of a closed system, but it also brilliantly illuminates the power of an open one. So the question to leave you with, to reflect on in our own lives, is simply this: what happens when we choose to open the loop?